Hello and welcome. Today we tackle the topic of ROI, and as an organization made up largely of executives responsible for making investment decisions, perhaps no other topic spawns more internal discussion after working with sales and marketing organizations than that of ROI. Doesn't matter which country we're in, we're continually surprised at the lack of involvement that sellers have when a deal progresses to the ROI stage. After working so hard to get a deal to that stage, too many sellers pause and believe that ROI is something the customer alone must own. And when you think about it, you've sold your solution many more times than your customers will buy it. Nobody's in a better position to ensure that a fair and reasonable computation of projected returns is made than you. Most importantly, nobody stands more to gain than making sure your numbers come out where we want them than you. In today's session, we're going to share the most common mistakes we see sellers make when a deal gets to that ROI stage, as well as some practical strategies and steps you can take on your next deal to get involved. To lead today's session, I welcome back co-founder and chairman of Executive Conversation, Jim Melillo. Jim brings a broad CFO experience and background from both public and privately held companies, corporate development and treasury, mergers and acquisitions, as well as financing. During this session, we encourage your questions. Please enter those in the Q&A dialog box on your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we have time for at the conclusion of today's program. We'll also be having some polling questions, and we welcome your participation in those as well. Without further ado, Jim, let me turn the program over to you.
Eric, thanks so very much, and everybody, welcome back. 600 plus registrations. Wow, that's amazing. I promise, for those of you that were on last month, this will be a no coughing zone. I'm sorry I sounded like it. Some people sent me emails that I was dying, but it was just a bad cough. First of all, I want to start off by congratulating Executive Conversation and the people that just won one of the top training companies in the world. When I took a look at what the people had done in Executive Conversation and how they were able to position themselves as one of the premier organizations, pretty impressed. Last year they won the Burson Award as one of the top organizations in learning as far as that went, and this year another organization as well as some others have just embraced them. So let's start off, as we always do, with a poll. And the reason we set up the poll in the beginning is very simple. Your answers help me guide through the next 25 minutes. So, very simple. Just check which best describes your familiarity developing and presenting an ROI. A, I'm extremely familiar, very familiar. B, somewhat familiar. C, I'm not involved in most of the ROIs I do. D, we don't do that. So, as always, we give you 10 seconds to fill in the poll. Everybody please vote. More people that vote, the better view we have, the more I can tailor this conversation to the audience that's here. A, very familiar. B, somewhat familiar. C, I'm not that involved in the deals. Or D, we don't get involved at all. Great. Let's close the poll. Eric, what kind of numbers do we have to basically guide the poll business?
Jim, interesting responses. Fairly even disbursement across the categories. Top of the list at 60%, somewhat familiar. Followed by 22%, very familiar. 14%, not often involved. And only 4% are saying they're not familiar with that at all.
Excellent to know. So what it sounds like is that the audience understands that the language of decision makers is around ROIs. As always, I'm not reading the slides. Mostly what I'm going to do is talk about them. One of the major things that the reason we're doing this session, although it's probably got the least sexiest name of any session we've ever done, is approximately 85% of all deals over $1 million have basically not only have an ROI being done on them, but in the recent study, they're using internal rate of return, probably the most complex version of hurdle rate, discount rate, net present value, et cetera. So what we know is that projects probably in the $250,000 to $500,000 size are getting some form of ROI done. And once you hit that $1 million, and again, your portion of that project may only be $200,000. But for me, the total investment is $1 million, and thus I'm not only going to be doing an ROI, but also an internal rate of return. And so I think the number one issue we talk about is why and how do your customers score the projects? And second of all, are you involved? There are only 3 people that can be involved in our ROI. That's you, that's your competitor, or that's me doing it by myself with no input from you. As you think about those 3, I'm sure it's pretty easy to figure out which one benefits you the most. So, why do these projects fail? Well, why do you fail and why do you succeed is pretty much going to be the backdrop of this entire discussion. Cute little phrase from Albert Einstein. I don't know if he was, I doubt he was talking about ROIs, but nonetheless, an interesting application of his thought to this topic. Let me go through these. Number 1, your ROI doesn't match my project, and we're going to show you about 6 different reasons why that happens. 2, and this happens almost always with TCO, and those of you that have been on with my conversations before know that I am not a big fan of TCO. As I've always told people, TCO is, Jim, if we could tear off one of your arms, which one would be the lowest cost to tear off? ROI says, hey, Jim, how about we don't tear off your arms? How about we try to find a solution that actually benefits you? So TCO, lowest cost, really does not favor a complete solution on your part, and it doesn't favor value. This is around cost and price. ROI is around value. The next thing you need to know is that your projects fail because you don't take advantage of currencies and my people. By my people, I usually mean the CFO's people. What we want to do is make sure that we're utilizing our capital to the best of our ability. And so what I will traditionally do as a CFO will either be assign people to research and development, IT, operations, marketing, etc., and they'll either report directly into me or they'll have a dotted line reporting relationship. Their goal is to become, in a sense, mini CFOs within the customers. And a lot of times you're just not familiar with them. And that's a problem because ultimately it's you representing your company and the resources you can bring to me, the buyer, that determines the ROI, not some really cool TCO software which, no matter what numbers I put in it, always favor you. So let's take a look at ROI. A couple of fundamentals on this. Again, as I've told many people that have been on this, when you're not sure how to do a ratio, whether it's ROI, ROA, return on assets, return on equity, I always change the word O from on to over. So if you're doing a return on investment, it's return over investment. Return on equity becomes return over equity. So a simple way to remember what's going on. So how do we evaluate them? Well, as I mentioned, internal rate of return is starting to kick in at approximately $1 million. Payback period, that occurred pretty much when we began to see a capture of cash. So I would say from 2008 to 2010 was when you began to see that really kicking in. It's pretty much disappearing in all but government. And net present value applies to all deals, smaller to larger, because it is a fundamental part of internal rate of return. Most analyses share a common framework. What I mean by that is you need to understand what my total investment, my total return is, and we'll talk about that in a second. One of the things that I've done the entire session on, and those of you who remember my session on lease, was we make decisions based on 2 things. 1, does it have a good return on investment investing in the project? 2, how do I finance, how do I pay for the project? These are 2 separate decisions. This does not make this look good. I've had more salespeople bring in their leasing people and say, Jim, I can cut my price by 7% more by putting in leasing. You have a good ROI and you have a good finance. And in the future, we'll hold a class on using those together. But by the way, these people should be at the same time. You should be bringing your finance and leasing people in on the 2nd call, not on the 10th call. So how do you get to a great ROI? Beat the hurdle rate. Get a great internal rate of return. Well, the first problem that comes without an ROI, this is mostly what you're going to see, in your deals. The second problem I see in people getting an ROI that makes the hurdle rate, that makes the internal rate of return, is you have not addressed the concept of risk. So I need to know that when you give me numbers, that they are real. And not only that, I need to know as the CFO, but your partner, the VP of R&D, the VP of hospitals nursing, the VP of operations, the VP of IT, also are coming to me as the CFO with the solution, and that solution embodies in it, I feel comfortable with these numbers. The second thing that will move your ROI up to more success is the time frame. The reality of return on investment, the reality of all of this is money captured, saved, increased revenue sooner wins. When you start taking a look at $1 million saved, $10 million saved, 5 years out, you're looking at roughly $240,000 or $2.4 million. So I take $10 million of savings in year 5. By the time I get back to year 1, or today's dollars, roughly, that's only worth 24%. The last area that there's failure in is quantifying soft returns. So I'm going to give you a good example of that at the very end of it relative to simple things like customer sat. So these are all the opportunities that are available to you. And this is all the directions we've seen. And what we want to now talk about are the mistakes. Failure is a little tough word, but you know what? Usually your mistakes end up becoming a failure. So let's take a look at them. Not understanding all of the hard returns. I'm going to give you an example here, one that maybe some people have heard before, and that is around inventory. So you come to me and you have a solution, product, software, hardware, whatever it is that will help me with my inventories. And when you begin doing your ROI, when you begin doing the R, the return, the savings or the increase in revenue, again, don't think of returns as just savings. Savings or increase in revenue, you have a nice idea. And that idea is, with reducing inventory, Jim, we can help you reduce your cost of goods sold. That's fantastic. But you know what? You're not going to sell a solution based on that. We also, if you reduce my inventory, reduce my real estate costs, yeah, I'll need less real estate because I'll have less inventory. Well, if I have less real estate, will I also have less equipment to move that around? How about less people? Yep. How about less taxes on the inventory? Yes. How about less utilities for a smaller space? Absolutely. How about lower insurance? Absolutely. How about less theft? How about less obsolescence? How about, so what you begin to realize is, if you don't understand that your solution does all of these, you're going to find yourself selling and trying to win your project on, hi, let me help you reduce your cost of goods with inventory. Make sure you capture all the hard returns when you show me your solution. Second of all, not quantifying soft returns. Customer sat used to be a simple soft return that people used to say, yes, that's interesting. Now, I would say 10% of every proxy, DEF 14A, I read, has a customer sat component of it, and I'll give you an example of that. Third one is not selling wide enough and high enough. Every one of you has probably taken a sales training class where they said, call higher, call wider. Thank you. Well, our entire company was built on the fact that those people left you there going, what the heck does that mean? How do I do it? Calling wider means basically capturing multiple budgets. And the great thing about capturing multiple budgets and having, like we just showed you, multiple effects is that you get more people to support your project, but more importantly, you have more effects. You have more ways in which inventory reduction affects the outcome. With more people, more budgets, and greater effects across the enterprise, you have a greater solution. Thus, you have a higher R. Not involving me in the analysis. I already talked about that. I have people who I place within every department. You should involve them in it. And those are my internal resources. And you should not feel uncomfortable saying, Jim, we've done the preliminary ROI. Here's our marketing material on it. Here's the success story we did when we worked with Toyota, when we worked with Anheuser-Busch, whomever. Now, I'd like to customize that for you. What resources do you have inside to show me that R&D savings, that revenue growth? If you don't do all this, it is always easier. This is your toughest competitor, is do nothing. And right now, that must be happening for you because we're seeing the largest growth of cash in the history of the world. U.S. is being estimated at having over $1 trillion of cash. When we take a look at the investment, here are the mistakes I see people making when they come to me. One is you come to me and say to me, look, Jim, this is only going to require an investment of $1.2 million of hardware. Well, how about the software? How about the system integration? How about the cost to my nursing group? How about the cost of training all of my manufacturing people? By recognizing only your costs, you overlook, first of all, my other direct costs, all these other groups, as well as my time. I was working with a travel company, and they said, you know what, the great thing about our solution is there's no I. There's never an investment. We just come in and we change everything for the customer, and it's all return. Well, as a buyer, that's absolutely not correct. I have to change my people. I have to make an IT integration. I have to get my people starting to do things another way. I have to audit that. So there's always an investment. By not overlooking my time, and that all the other things I'm looking at, that's a big problem. And again, people got used to payback for the last couple of years. Make sure you do the time value of money study. Make sure you do the net present value, the internal rate of return. And again, without it, it's easy for me to do nothing. We have been constantly talking about the changing role of the salesperson. The role you need to inhabit if you're going to be successful. So let me share with you a few changes that we see. On a preliminary discussions, you will come in, you'll talk about your capabilities, maybe some competitive comparisons, and those of you that have heard me speak before probably give me an entire benefits discussion and feel that you've really differentiated yourself. Well, I would say to you, if you want to be different, and that's almost what every one of these webinars is about, is how to be different, how to step up. We're talking about doing that joint ROI. Now, as many of you know, and I've mentioned it before, about 90% of all sales calls made on me in my history were bad. That's obvious, Jim. You're a CFO. You're this New Yorker. You're a tough guy. No wonder you have them. You probably scared the heck out of most of these guys. So we have a gentleman who works within executive conversation that also does what I do. And he's basically probably one of the most laid-back men you'll ever meet. He is a Chinese California surfer. So he's a Buddhist surfer. And Randall's probably one of the nicest guys you'll meet, easygoing. Oh, by the way, he became the Undersecretary of Defense for a while. And I asked Randall, you know, you're a laid-back, easy California type guy who's had tremendous responsibilities in running our country. When you had these people coming to you, what percentage of them were bad? Well, because Randall is a much more forgiving guy, only 85% of all the people that called on him made bad sales calls. So no matter who you talk to, whether it's this tough New York CFO or it's this more laid-back California executive, what are we looking for? We're looking for people to change. We're looking for these good proposals to become great proposals. We don't want them to fail. We don't want your proposal to fail. Think about that. VP of R&D, I want to get the global R&D system implemented. It is critical that we are able to roll out a secure process that allows us to roll out pharmaceuticals, that allows us to roll out technology on a global basis. And if you can't show all the departments that benefit and put that together, you miss out. You end up with a low ROI. When you talk about the full department, call wider, you have no problems. So what am I looking for specifically? Take a look. We've done the 5-minute income statement class. We've done the 5-minute balance sheet class here. We told you then that if you can't change a specific line item on my income statement or my balance sheet, there's no reason for me to work with you. Second of all, you need to come in with assumptions that fit with my expectations. Very easily done if you have that conversation with me. Very difficult to do if you just walk in with a piece of ROI or TCO software and say, give me these 12 numbers and I'll tell you how much you save. It just doesn't work for me. And finally, consideration of perceived intangibles. As it becomes more competitive in getting an ROI approved, your understanding, your view of me gives a much greater opportunity for you to succeed around these, quote, intangible areas. So we've come to the next poll question, as we always do, and let's give a chance for you to tell me how well you understand ROI. So which of the following would not be a useful metric for justifying the investment in the ROI proposal to me? A, increasing European revenue, decreasing development cycles, reducing IT expenses, increasing assets, increasing gross margin. Which one of these 5 is not a useful metric? Again, it's a 15-second poll. Click now or forever hold your peace. So, as we look at these 5 answers, which one is not a useful metric? So let's close the poll up. Let's take a look and see what the group voted on. Eric, what do we have?
Jim, a very clear winner here in this one. That's the response of increasing assets at 68%. The other 4 categories were...
Go ahead. We're going to have to make these polls tougher. Go ahead.
You're obviously making some good points here. The other 4 categories were pretty evenly covered between 5 and 10% each.
Very good. No, absolutely correct. Adding assets in and of itself is a tough way to build ROI. Adding assets which then decrease development time, reduce IT expenses, make a lot of sense. Again, for those of you that want to keep following these conversations on more than a once-a-month 30-minute, make sure you're signed up for the conversation.com blog or you're on the LinkedIn groups. Returns are numerous. The more you put into the solution, the better I'm going to work with you. The more I'm going to trust your solution. The more departments you will get involved. The more resources I'll put behind you. When you come up to me with just a single one, and again, each one of these has multiple portions to it, you get more views from me, you get more trust from me, and you get more investment from me. When you talk about investment, make sure you understand not only yours, mine, and any other costs that are going into it. Don't come in with, this is a $250,000 slam dunk. And that's how ROIs are done. What are the investment components? We've talked about these. Hardware, software, capital costs. Implementation. These might come in as OPEX. These came in as CAPEX, but trust me, they all come in as the investment for me. What are the ongoing or the increased costs to implement your solution? Make sure you understand not only those, but also as we continue to grow the project. When you express your returns, make sure you are talking about both the revenue and the cost improvement. I will tell you, we get 90% of our deals this way, and only 10% of the people look at the revenue improvement. Why do you care? Because when we now take a look at what are the best ROI impacts, we look at revenue improvement. The great quote on one of those investment shows was an executive was on talking about how they were continuing to cut costs, and the person at C&S 2011, meaning that you can't cut to grow. You have to grow through revenue improvement. And pretty much this is where the world is looking at. And so no matter who you are selling to, whether it is France, whether it's Germany, whether it's the U.S., whether it's Brazil, revenue improvement is becoming critical. And so as you take a look at these different areas where you can drive revenue, whether it's reducing time to market, which gets you market share, reducing customer turnover, thus you increase your churn, you cut your churn rate, all of these are going to drive my implementation. And your ability to put together multiples allows your R to go through the roof. You know, I talked a little bit before about converting soft returns into hard returns, and I'm going to talk to you about a company, sorry for my penmanship, called Press Ganey. Press Ganey is an interesting company. They basically do outpatient, hospital, healthcare type of interviews. And they ask them, did you feel you were given the right medications? Did you feel you were treated right, etc.? Press Ganey really just tells people how happy their customers are, the patients. What Press Ganey and hospitals have begun to realize, though, is I can begin to quantify this, and some of the healthcare organizations I have found have seen that a 10% increase in a Press Ganey score increases my revenue 1 to 2%. Now, gee, Jim, that doesn't sound like a lot, 1 to 2%. Well, first of all, you've got to recognize that most healthcare organizations in the United States, 50% of them are losing money, 50% are making money, and when you take the average, most companies are making between 1 and 2% profit. So to lose 1 to 2% of your revenue while maintaining fixed costs can kill an organization. I was just looking at Partners, which is a conglomeration of the top healthcare organizations in the Boston area. $7-8 billion sized company. Out of that $7 to $8 billion worth of sales, they did 160 million, or basically 2% profit. Their Press Ganey scores go down, customer sat goes down, thus they are looking at a 1 to 2% reduction in sales, which probably would reduce their profits down to 50 to 70. And oh, by the way, these folks at Partners have been struggling to pay for other costs out of this small $160 million profit. Are happy. I mean, what are they going to do? Go? And the answer is absolutely. Patients are walking based on Press Ganey scores, references from other patients, which were that. What we want to do is now get to a few of your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Eric, but before we do, again, summary. Make sure the returns are there. The more returns, use the inventory example. If you can't come up with 7 or 8 changes that occur, you probably don't understand my business well enough. Second of all, make sure you can adequately describe my total investment. You may not be making that total investment, but it will give you a lot of credibility with me, because in history, I've made 2 or 3 IT changes. I built 2.5 factories in my experience. You've probably sold 10, 20, 50, 100. You have a greater advantage of understanding the future. Help me understand the R and the I side of it. Eric?
Jim, thank you for an outstanding presentation here today, and we are overwhelmed with questions. I am going to sort these. We'll address as many as we can. And of course, we work with sales and marketing organizations around the world, multilingual support, culturally relevant support, whichever country you might be listening to this broadcast in. We welcome hearing from you at the email and telephone contact points on the screen here. Talk about how executive conversation might heighten the business acumen, financial acumen of your organizations. In short, quite a number of queries came in. Hey, great presentation. Is it recorded? Can I watch this again? Absolutely. All of you will receive an email shortly with a link to the recording. We're encouraging you to share that with your colleagues and others who might find benefit from this presentation. Jim, let me pick a few of the questions that we have, get your perspective on it. A number of questions came in around the topic of soft returns. And for example, something like looking at reducing customer support instances and that kind of thing. Share a little bit how you might suggest to a customer how you quantify that kind of metric.
Sure. Customer support, again, pretty soft, like customer sat was until we began to take a look at it. What we have done is we've worked with Vodafone and several other telecom companies around the world. Vodafone, for those of you who may not know them, one of their smaller investments is they own 47% of Verizon. What they found was that cost of that call center, that cost of that customer support was really what affected what was called churn. Churn is basically how many people walk away from your telecom. So if you have a churn of 5%, that means you've got to get 5% new people just to get to a 0% growth. And so call center, customer sat, the ability to create that whole customer experience reduces churn, and that has a real cost because I can show you what the cost of a new customer acquisition is, $417. And second of all, I can then multiply that by the amount of churn, the number of customers that left.
Thanks, Jim. Another question pertains to what you talked about during the presentation, at least in my mind, of not involving you and your team in the analysis. A viewer from the UK talking about a financial services client says that client has said that they don't really like vendors coming in and sharing ROI business cases. Those returns generally don't materialize. Thoughts on using cases, or is the issue here really not jointly developing those cases so the customer takes ownership as well?
I think it's a three-step process, and I can address the financial services industry just like the others, but it's a three-step process. The idea of your showing me, here's what we've done at HSBC, here's what we've done at Barclays, is a function of that's interesting, but doesn't apply to me. And that's what clients are going to do, whether they're British banks or whether they're U.S. manufacturers. That's merely the starting point for you. Your conversation around this should take three definite levels, and you should be prepared for all three. One, I'd like to share with you what other banks are doing. Not so much the 22%, the 16 to 13. It is the word picture you guide me through. It is the word picture of here is how Barclays, here is how HSBC changed, and by the way, their return happened to be 12%. Second of all, here are your initiatives that this ROI aligns to, and here are the areas you want to change. Because you give me the word picture in step one, it aligns with my initiatives in step two, I have an alignment. The third part and the most valuable part is when you have had that business conversation with me and you've followed through on all the methodology we've talked about in the past, then you should be asking me for a resource to take the best practices you know of, but apply it to my local bank here at Royal Bank of Scotland or whoever it is. It's a three-step process. At that point, when you know that and when you can talk me through that, I'm going to be much more open to working with you.
And Jim, one question here I think warrants clarification. A pushback on one of the poll responses that we had. Question reads, how in the world do you say increasing assets is not a good metric in ROI? Cash is an asset. If I increase cash, doesn't that increase return, especially if I can use that cash elsewhere?
Great question. The concept of increasing assets and one of those assets being cash, obviously we can have a great discussion about how adding cash can't be a bad thing. One of the things that has happened is that cash has become, in a sense, for SMBs, extremely valuable, small, medium-sized businesses, and for large businesses, it has almost no value. The reason it has no value is because there's no return on it. Now, why do they care? Well, one of the things that companies are doing is that they are utilizing their cash to make acquisitions. But once the acquisitions dry up, that cash eventually gets sent out to shareholders as a dividend. I'll use Microsoft as a good example. Microsoft has been paying dividends, probably for the last 10, 15 years at least. But what was interesting is that I'm going to guess 6-7 years ago, Microsoft had gotten so much cash, about $60 billion, that they made a one-time payment of $30 billion in a dividend. And ultimately, it didn't move the stock. If you take a look at Microsoft's stock price in 2000 or 2002, and you look at it today, 10 years later, not a large difference. So the accumulation of cash in and of itself, the increase of that asset, is nice to have if you're an SMB, but as a large organization, I'm really looking for growth. And so adding assets probably is the weakest one. Adding gross margin, all of those are going to drive my stock price, which ultimately drives shareholder value, and that's ultimately the test of a good idea.
Jim, we are overflowing with questions. I'm going to make an executive call here since we still have hundreds of people that are still on the line to entertain a few more, perhaps with some short responses here before we wrap up today. Quickly, what is a typical cost of capital rate today, one viewer has asked?
18 to 22% is the one that I have found in the last 4 months among the Fortune 500 in the U.S. The astonishing reason that's an astonishing number is the average cost of borrowing for the Fortune 500 is probably between 3 and 5%, and that means the spread is roughly 15%. So executives are looking for an 18 to 22% return. They've got a 15% spread because they think most investments are high risk. Reducing risk is equally as important as making a return.
And a whole host of questions pertain to the general question of what's the difference between net present value and internal rate of return? Why would you choose one versus the other? What are the circumstances that dictate that?
Probably whether you've got a great 12C calculator and an MBA. The difference between NPV and internal return is really quite simple. NPV takes your future earnings, your future cost reductions, and discounts them back. And that's all it does. Internal rate of return is a little more complex, and it basically gets you a return on your returns. And so the IRR tends to look at, I've in year one returned some money, and then I've been able to utilize that. And so internal rate of return pushes money towards the front. Savings in year 1, 2, and 3. Revenue increases in year 1, 2, and 3 more powerfully than NPV. IRR used by larger companies on larger deals. NPV used by smaller companies or smaller deals.
Again, a number of questions I'm going to paraphrase here pertaining to situations where the customer is reluctant to share numbers. Thoughts in terms of how you get them to open up a little bit, open the door to that collaborative joint ROI process.
Goes back to my discussion around the 3 steps. A, you show up with a word picture that allows the decision makers who will benefit from the investment, IT, R&D, operations. Who is the real buyer of your solution? It's usually not the CIO. It's usually operations, finance, R&D, healthcare, whatever. Second of all, being able to take that word picture and show what the changes were that then caused your example to get to 12, 20, 30% return. The second portion of that is your ability to describe and link that to the initiatives that I have talked about in my 10K, in my corporate governance section, in my speech to shareholders. And then, only then, should you be asking for those resources.
With that, I want to thank all of you for attending and staying with us a good 10 minutes after the hour in today's session. Great set of questions that are out there. Apologize for all of those that we were unable to address specifically here. Jim, thank you again for a wonderful presentation, and we look forward to seeing